Oh man, no problem. I'll just use accelerate. Smooth, wild boy.
While some characters would have fun outside like Laszlo and the gang, others would end up getting superpowers and fight off bad guys like Ben 10. It's the story of Ben, who goes on a cross-country family vacation with his cousin Gwen and his grandpa Max. While on their way, Ben finds an alien device called the Omnitrix, which attached to his arm and gave him the ability to transform into a choice of a wide selection of alien creatures. But with these new powers, he must now fight off any supernatural or galactic enemy that stands in his way. The series was the brainchild of a group of people with a background not in animation, but in comics. The team is known as Man of Action, and they consist of Joe Casey, Joe Kelly, Duncan Rouleau, and Steven T. Siegel, all of which have been writers for Marvel and companies, with one of their biggest contributions being on the X-Men comics. It took the team 3 years to develop the entire concept of Ben 10 before Cartoon Network came in to pick up the show. In fact, when looking into the concept art of illustrator Stephen E. Gordon, some of the plans look a lot more different than how the final version ultimately became. Even some of the transformations had a different design and name, like Digger, Dragonfly, Inferno, Plant Guy, Razor Jaw, and Strong Guy. One idea that did stick since the very beginning of production was to have a villain that was in the Omnitrix, and that was when the guys decided to develop Ghost Freak into the show. He even replaced Cannonbolt to fit himself in the original set of aliens. The show made its premiere on December 27th, 2005, and had gathered some popularity on its original run, even getting an Emmy along the way. It only lasted for 4 seasons with 52 episodes, ending it off on April 15th, 2008, and had the series finale be a TV movie called Ben 10: Secret of the Omnitrix, which ironically aired months before the series itself would close off, like right in the middle of season 4. If you think that was weird, Cartoon Network even made a live-action TV movie a few months after Secret of the Omnitrix called Ben 10: Race Against Time. However, even if this series ended, it would only be the beginning of Ben 10. In just 3 days after the original show ended, a new series stepped in called Ben 10: Alien Force, which was set 5 years after its predecessor, where the characters are now teenagers and would take a darker and more serious tone. The show did not last long, with just 3 seasons with 46 episodes and another live-action TV movie, this time being Ben 10: Alien Swarm. Yeah, a Cartoon Network that brought out 2 live-action movies. You could practically smell the irony. Yeah, the show was rather mixed amongst fans, but it did earn an Emmy again and got popular enough to get another series after Alien Force's run, with Ben 10: Ultimate Alien on April 23rd, 2010. Now set only a year after last time, Ben has to learn about using the upgraded version of the Omnitrix called the Ultimatrix, that can give him powers to become ultimate forms of his transformations, while also dealing with worldwide fame when his identity ended up being revealed by a young fan. During the show's run, on top of getting a computer-animated TV movie at the end of the series called Ben 10: Destroy All Aliens, it got a crossover special where Ben teams up with another Cartoon Network show made by Man in Action called Generator Rex in Ben 10: Generator Rex: Heroes United on November 25th, 2011. The length of Ultimate Alien ended up a bit of the same as its predecessors, with 3 seasons and 52 episodes. A few months after it ended in 2012, the next series came in the form of Ben 10: Omniverse, where the story would switch between Ben from a year after the original series and Ben after Ultimate Alien. The show was meant to be a throwback to the series that started it all, complete with a bit more of a comical tone. Although it only lasted for 2 years, from August 1st, 2012 to November 14th, 2014, this one had more episodes than all the other series before it, with 80 of them separated in 8 different story arcs, on top of getting Ben's 3rd Emmy. When it was time to create a new series after it in 2016, it went on a completely different path. Instead of continuing the current storyline, the show completely rebooted the first one with a more cartoony tone, and it's even back to just being called Ben 10, which made its premiere on October 1st, 2016 in Australia, New Zealand, and in the Asia Pacific, and on April 10th, 2017 in the United States. Over the years, Ben 10 became a serious powerhouse for the channel, not just in ratings for the TV shows, but thanks to the help of toys and games, Ben managed to make an accumulative total of more than $4.5 billion in retail sales. So let's recap. With a total of 5 animated series, 4 TV movies, 2 of which are in live action, 3 Emmy Awards, a crossover special, and numerous of toys and video games, they would all combine to form Cartoon Network's biggest and strongest original franchise. Have you ever had one of those moments where you want to try out an idea but ultimately it failed? But then years later, you would look back at that idea and the only thing you could think of is just, what the fridge was I thinking? Because at that point, you could not think of one logical explanation of how that was a good idea in the first place. Well, in the mid-2000s, the head of Cartoon Network, Jim Samples, had to go and resign while he must have had one of those what was I thinking moments after he would go on and execute one of the dumbest marketing campaigns of all time. The channel wanted to experiment with other types of audiences. They've already nailed both kids and adults, but now they want to try to appeal to preschoolers. So in 2005, the network created a new block called Tickle You, which would air between 9 and 11 a.m., and it would feature shows like Firehouse Tales, Gerald McBoing Boing, Harry and His Bucket Full of Dinosaurs, Peppa Pig, and more. However, it didn't work out well, and it closed off 2 years later along with all the shows that were in it. Now, this was not the thing that got Jim out of the network. That was just a little failed experiment. What did get Jim to leave was a unique marketing strategy for a movie based on one of the channel's shows. So, what was it and how bad could it be? Was it a commercial? A billboard? A poster?
Boston police did shut down a bridge, several main roads, including an interstate, and stop boat traffic on the Charles.
Location by location with the bomb squad to check out these so-called magnetic signs, lights.
All in response to 9 separate reports of suspicious devices with circuit boards, wires, and batteries.
Which is why they had the battery pack to light up. It had a battery pack, and that's what made everybody nervous because they equate battery packs and wires and such with bombs.
You know, you're really great at taking a good fun situation and turn it into something crappy.
Yep! On January 31st, 2007, in an effort to promote Aqua Teen Hunger Force call-in movie film for theaters, several light-bright style devices were placed all over the Boston area with a bunch of little LED lights aligned to form one of the Moonanite characters from the show. However, many people in the city mistook them as bombs, and the entire marketing campaign ended up becoming a bomb hoax and forever labeled by many names, but the most common one would be the 2007 Boston Moonanite panic. A few days after the incident, Jim Samples resigned and was later replaced by Stuart Snyder 3 months later. His first big contribution to the channel late in that same year was bringing in some Canadian animated series for American and other international audiences to see, including 16, Chaotic, George of the Jungle, Total Drama, and more. However, Cartoon Network was still capable of crafting some new series of its own, including Chowder. The show follows a little apprentice named Chowder, who works in a catering company owned by Mung Daal. However, because he could be a little bit of a scatterbrain and always in the need of eating everything that he sees, Chowder can often find himself in some rather peculiar situations. It all began when C.H. Greenblatt was thinking up of ideas for his own show while working on SpongeBob SquarePants at Nickelodeon. One of which that got stuck in his head was an apprentice story in the veins of something like Walt Disney's The Sword in the Stone. But to make his plan stand out from the rest, he would make it food-themed with a little apprentice wanting to be a chef. On top of that, Greenblatt would also find more inspirations for the other elements of the show, including a variety of Saturday morning cartoons and the works of Dr. Seuss. When crafting the characters, which are all named after a food dish, some of them would go through some changes. One of the biggest examples of this is Mung Dal. Since he was named after an Indian soup, he was supposed to have an Indian accent, but because it might end up looking a bit racist, the idea was scrapped and ended up going with Dwight Schultz having his voice inspired by Frank Morgan, the actor who played the wizard in the 1939 classic feature, The Wizard of Oz.
No, I'm afraid it's true. There's no other wizard except me.
What do you mean you refuse to go back? What about truffles? Well, I guess I'm gonna have to go out there and deal with the ladies.
Another character that went through a voice change was Schnitzel, but this time, it was when the show began to be on air. On the first episode, The Froggy Apple Crumple Flumpkin, he was voiced by Kevin Michael Richardson, but due to his busy schedule, he was replaced by John DiMaggio for the rest of the series. With Truffles, her short temper was based off Greenblatt's mother, but it was proven to be tough to work with, since she can be pretty nasty. The only way the crew could bring her in without seeming too harsh is by giving her only one little appearance at a time. As they would say, a little Truffles goes a long way. Funny enough, Panini was supposed to be another character that would give Chowder a bit of a hard time, similar to Angelica from the Rugrats, and have pointy ears. However, CH was not a fan of those bratty type of characters, and changed her so that she would have a crush on the title character and switch the points to bunny ears. To make the romance funnier, he gave Chowder the mindset that he's still too young to think about girls. The visuals of the series has been known to use a wide variety of animation mediums and even beyond that. Of course, it's mainly a 2D animated show, but it would also use the classic ink and paint style, watercolors, stop motion with food, clay and action figures done by Screen Novelties, live action, and even puppets. For the patterns on some of the characters' clothing and skin, the template for that pattern would be put as a full screen image and then sent to the production house. From there, the characters would be made in a way where whatever needed to be filled was done by the image behind it. This is why whenever the characters move, the pattern doesn't. This is a technique that had been previously done, like on Gankoksuo, the Offbeats, and the animated Mr. Bean series. The series premiered on November 2nd, 2007, and was enjoyed by both audiences and critics alike. Even Animation Insider stated, featuring brightly colored environments, stylishly matted fixed background artworks, and humorously designed characters with unique personalities to boot, Chowder is one of the network's largest creative accomplishments in recent years. It also gathered several nominations like 6 Annies and 2 Emmy Awards, but it did end up winning 1 Emmy. The show would end up getting a total of 3 seasons with 49 episodes, ending it off on August 7th, 2010. What happened was that Cartoon Network canceled it because it didn't fit the criteria of being popular with older boys. However, Greenblatt wasn't mad. In fact, he was pretty happy. Here's what he said about it. I didn't really think there'd be this many upsides to having a show officially canceled by a network, but I'm feeling happier than I've been in a long time. Since we've only got post-production, my schedule finally eases up. I haven't had a break like this in a long time. Chowder has opened up a lot of awesome possibilities for me, and creatively, I'm feeling more inspired than ever. After Chowder was done, he would go on to create another series that ultimately got picked up by Nickelodeon called Harvey Beaks. If you take away the T from TNT, then all you get is just network television. If you take away the A from ABC, then all you get is a broadcasting company. If you take away the Fox from Fox News, then you would get a channel that would report real news from credible journalists that would respect women. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that each channel has its own identity. And when you take away one small piece from it, then you would end up with a channel that would literally have nothing to make it stand out from the rest. So, with all that said, let me ask you a crazy question. What would happen if you take away the cartoon from Cartoon Network? Now let's step back to 2006. The channel decided to release its first experiment onto live action with a TV movie called Reanimated, where a boy named Jimmy was able to see cartoon characters in real life. This would then make way to spin off its own series and the first live action show on the network called Out of Jimmy's Head. Okay, so that was just one time that they had a non-cartoon show on Cartoon Network, right? Well, during the last days of Jim Sample's presidency, he was planning to bring in a lot more live action content and pass the baton to Stuart Snyder to have them come to fruition. However, at the same time, as you may recall when I was talking about some of the channel's biggest shows, you may notice a pattern that many of them would finish off during the end of the 2000s decade, like Ed, Edd and Eddy, Billy and Mandy, Kids Next Door, Foster's Home, and so much more. If that wasn't enough, even some of their most popular blocks would close down, including Cartoon Fridays in 2007 and Toonami in 2008. But then came June of 2009. It was the time when the little experiment with Reanimated fully infected the channel and went to remove the cartoon from Cartoon Network. May I introduce you to the channel's biggest mistake, CN Reel, a new block that would only present not live action shows, but live action reality shows! Like, dude, what would happen? Destroy, Build, Destroy, Survive This, Brain Rush, and more! And you know what? It could have actually been much worse! The channel had plans to create a lot more live action shows onto its roster, but they ended up scrapped due to the 2007 and 2008 Writers Guild of America strike, and there were even rumors that some of those canceled shows would have included golfing and military training. Again, there could have been live action, possibly reality shows about golf and military training on Cartoon Network! Anyways, as you can imagine, the block was a disaster, and it only lasted for a year, with most of the shows being canceled around the same time. At this point, Cartoon Network was at its worst. All the beloved classic series are done and moved to Boomerang. The fan-favorite blocks are gone. The Canadian cartoons were not as strong. CN Reel was an embarrassment, and it only had a handful of shows that kept it hanging by a thread. The network knew that it needed a time for change. A time to reboot itself. A time to bring in new shows that can help bring itself back up its feet. Yes, Cartoon Network needed Adventure Time. It's the many stories of Finn the Human and Jake the Dog, who set out to go on adventures in the psychedelic post-apocalyptic land of Ooh. Along the way, he would encounter and make friends with many of the inhabitants of the land, including Princess Bubblegum, Ice King, Marceline the Vampire Queen, Lumpy Space Princess, and many more. To see where this show all began, we gotta flip the channel from Cartoon Network to Nicktoons. Between 2008 and 2009, the channel had a spin-off of What a Cartoon by the original series creator Fred Siebert called Random Cartoons. During development, they decided to contact Cal Arts graduate Pendleton Ward to create a tune for them. When Penn pitched the idea, which was about a boy and his shape-shifting dog trying to save Princess Bubblegum from the evil Ice King, Siebert wasn't sure about the idea because it seemed too much like a student film than something that could potentially become a TV show. However, everyone else adored it, and they convinced Fred to change his mind and let Ward make his short. Along with his friends at Cal Arts like Neil Graff, Adam Muto, and Julian Norino, the production was complete for the animated short in the spring of 2006, with the title placed as Adventure Time. The cartoon made its premiere on Nicktoons on January 11th, 2007, and appeared again in Random Cartoons on December 7th, 2008. In between that time, it also leaked onto the internet and became a viral video, so it was both a hit online and on TV. So much so that the short even got nominated for an Annie. As for random cartoons, the only show that would end up becoming a Nicktoons series was Fanboy and Chum Chum. After the cartoon's success, Penn's next step is to take Adventure Time and turn it into an entire animated series, which surprisingly was anything but an easy task. The studio that helped him bring life to the short, Frederator Studios, tried pitching it to Nick, but they ended up refusing not once, but twice. So after their rights got expired, Frederator and Ward would move on to Cartoon Network. They didn't immediately say yes, they were just cautious and asked them if they could make one episode to see what the show would look like, just to make sure that the 7-minute short made for Nick wasn't a one-hit wonder. So Ward went on to work and craft a storyboard where Finn would take Bubblegum to a spaghetti supper date. The result came that the executives didn't like it. The problem with the new pitch is that it didn't have anything that made the original short special. The pitch would be reworked on again, and they finally decided it would be good enough for the network with the show's approval on September 2008. As for that storyboard pitch, it would go on to become one of the first episodes of the series called the Enchiridion. One of the significant changes that Adventure Time would go from the Nick cartoon to the Cartoon Network series was Finn. He was originally named Penn like the toon's creator, but Ward didn't like the idea. Also, he was originally voiced by Zach Shada, but because he wasn't able to reprise his role for the show, he was replaced by his brother Jeremy. When making Jake, his personality was inspired by Bill Murray's character in Meatballs named Tripper Harrison.
Yeah, man. Think, what would regular old sweet ladies be doing wandering the hills of Mount Cragdor?
Every team they're sending over here has their own personal masseuse. Not masseur, masseuse. But it doesn't matter.
As for the overall tone, it was always meant to be like a dark comedy. But the series wanted to have some lighthearted beauty incorporated as well, like Hayao Miyazaki's My Neighbor Totoro. Even if Cartoon Network accepted to make Adventure Time as a show, executives were still uneasy with what Ward and his team were doing. It wasn't like they were worried about this would flop, it was more because they just want to understand what Ward's mindset was when making the show. So to make sure everybody can be on the same page, Cartoon Network brought in 3 SpongeBob SquarePants veterans to join the team, including Derek Drymon, Nick Jennings, and Meriwether Williams. Other strong animators came in to help as well, like Dan Bandit, aka Ghost Shrimp, to design the backgrounds, and Thorup Van Orman as Ward's mentor. One of the biggest influences of the show is something that Penn and the Adventure Time team love playing, which is Dungeons & Dragons. Sure, they were too busy working on the show to have time to throw some dice, but some of the stories that the writers would come up with are tales that would sound awesome for a D&D game. The series officially made its start as the first Cartoon Network show of the 2010 decade on April 5th, 2010 with the episode Slumber Party Panic, and it became the channel's biggest hit in years. Ratings would go through the roof with the number of viewers watching the show ranging from 2 to 3 million. Even critics were saying that the show is really good and later would praise it for going into deeper and more complex subjects like mental illness. It would gather a huge fan base to the point of becoming not a cult favorite, but a cult phenomenon, where geek conventions would be swarmed with cosplayers dressed up as their favorite characters from the series, and would become one of the most liked TV shows on Facebook. The series would receive numerous of nominations and win 22 awards, including 3 Annie Awards, 7 Primetime Emmys, and a Peabody Award. The latter stated that it won because it was purely and wonderfully imaginative in matter of classic theatrical cartoon past. It entertains even as it subtly teaches lessons about growing up, accepting responsibility, and becoming who you're meant to be. Not only that, but even the comic series by Kaboom Studios would get awards of its own, like a couple of Harvey Awards and an Eisner Award. The series would go on for a total of 9 seasons with approximately 280 episodes. Also, the series would go on to make a huge cultural impact, not just in the animation industry, but in many other forms of entertainment as well, like comics. It even led to some of the artists later making their own big-name animated works, some of which I'll get to later. Because of all this, It would be the starting point of a new age of both Cartoon Network and television animation. But Adventure Time wouldn't be alone to help create a new and stronger Cartoon Network. Finn and Jake had some help from a blue jay and a raccoon from Regular Show. It's about Mordecai and Rigby, who would do whatever it takes to entertain themselves in order to avoid their mundane jobs as park groundkeepers. Along with them at their work includes a ghost, a green guy, a yeti, and their bosses that includes a lollipop man and a gumball machine. I know it sounds weird in theory, but considering what Cartoon Network had over the years, this is pretty tame for them. Before I get into the origins of the show, allow me to present to you a special project the channel made called the Cartoonstitute, led by the Powerpuff Girls' Craig McCracken and My Life as a Teenage Robot's Rob Renzetti. It was meant to be a spiritual successor to What a Cartoon, developing 39 animated shorts from up and rising animators to see which ones would become the next big show on Cartoon Network, like how Dexter's Laboratory and the Powerpuff Girls were discovered. However, the project ended up being cancelled and only 14 of the 39 shorts were made to completion. One of these was from a CalArts student named J.G. Quintel. While he was studying and working at Cartoon Network, he developed 2 student films called The Naive Man from Lollyland and 2 in the AM/PM. When he was invited to create a pilot for the Cartoonstitute, he decided to take the characters from his shorts along with new ones and presented storyboards to McCracken and Rossetti, which they really enjoyed. The ultimate result of the Cartoonstitute project was that there were only 2 of those cartoons that ended up becoming a series for the channel. These include Secret Mountain Fort Awesome and, of course, Regular Show. When crafting the series, Quintel took many sources of inspiration. They can range from animated primetime sitcoms like Beavis and Butthead and The Simpsons, the style of Joe Murray's works since it helped that he did had a job at Camp Lazlo, games like Street Fighter and Toe Jam and Earl, and British sitcoms to help tone the humor like Little Britain, The Office, and especially The Mighty Boosh. As for the main characters, interestingly enough, JG looked into himself for the source. Mordecai is basically Quintel back in his days at CalArts as a college boy. So much so that he's even Mordecai's voice.
Did you just send Skips to the moon?
Isn't that what you said?
No, room! I sent him to his room, not the moon, you idiot!
As for Rigby, well, he just randomly drew a hula-hooping raccoon and thought it was cool enough for the show. One unique trait about the series is that while it does have an original soundtrack of its own, it would occasionally use licensed music. Most of them are from the 1980s that Quintel likes to jam to, but he and his crew would pick the ones that would be suited best for the scene. One thing that he really appreciated from it was that it was like a win-win situation where older audiences would remember the old tunes and the young ones would find a new appreciation for them. The first episode was released on September 6, 2010, and right from the start, it was a massive success. Critics were loving the writing that it could be both weird and hilarious at the same time, and it was giving Cartoon Network some massive ratings. Like each episode would be watched by like 2 to 2.5 million viewers. It would receive tons of nominations and end up winning 1 Annie for the episode Excellent. After its 6th season, on August 14th, 2015, Regular Show would end up getting its own movie called, well, Regular Show the movie. And for the first time since the Powerpuff Girls movie, it managed to get released in theaters. Okay, it was a really limited release, but it still counts for something. The series would continue its run until January 16th, 2017, when it ended off with a regular epic finale battle. The show would end up with a total of 261 episodes over the course of 8 seasons. This would set a huge landmark on the channel because even before Adventure Time, Regular Show would be the first series to have more than 6 seasons on Cartoon Network.